I remember the first inkling that something was wrong. One damp Thursday evening, Rachel's eyes flickered with unease as she hovered by her phone. She smiled at me, but her expression was forced. The tension between us clung to the air like a bitter perfume. I chalked it up to stress at work, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. The next day, I noticed her texting late into the night, her face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. When I asked who it was, she mentioned a project colleague. Despite her casual tone, the explanation felt hollow. That subtle shift in her behavior ignited my suspicions, the first domino in a line of catastrophic revelations. I decided to stifle my suspicions until I was certain. One afternoon, she claimed she had errands to run, leaving the house in a sleek dress more suited for a romantic dinner than a quick trip to the pharmacy. Curiosity overcame me, and I followed her. She drove to a secluded parking lot on the outskirts of town, where a black SUV awaited her. My stomach churned as I watched her greet a tall, dark-haired stranger with a tight, intimate embrace. My hands shook against the steering wheel. The betrayal was undeniable, yet I stayed in my car, capturing a few blurry photographs for proof. My mind reeled with a mix of heartbreak and a simmering desire for vengeance. I felt both powerless and empowered, all at once. Returning home ahead of her, I tried to maintain a calm facade. Each tick of the clock rang in my ears as I waited for her arrival. When she finally walked through the door, she breezed past me with a smile, spinning a casual lie about shopping for groceries. I forced a pleasant nod, though my heart hammered against my ribs. Over the next few weeks, I became a quiet observer of her every move. Late-night texts, secretive phone calls, hurried departures without explanation. Each sign confirmed the gnawing suspicion that she had given her heart and her body to another man. My love for her curdled into a bitter ache, fueling a desire for a precise, devastating retribution. I refused to confront her without solid evidence. I enlisted the help of my old friend Mark, who worked in private security. He discreetly installed hidden cameras outside our home and tapped into her phone records with methods I preferred not to question. The truth arrived in cruel fragments: hushed phone calls where she exchanged tender words with a man named Vincent, late-night texts filled with flirtation and innuendo, and receipts for dinners at restaurants. I felt sick as I read and listened, yet a twisted part of me craved more detail, as if I needed overwhelming proof to accept her betrayal. Each discovery drove a wedge deeper between us until my admiration for her vanished, replaced by a cold rage that demanded satisfaction. I wanted her to feel the agony now my constant companion. I confronted her in my head 100 times before I dared to do it in person. Yet, I realized that a single outburst wouldn't quench the fury searing my insides. Confrontation alone was too simple, too fleeting. I needed something that mirrored her deceit, a plan so intricate that she would understand the depth of my betrayal. While she continued her charade, returning home each evening with shallow kisses and rehearsed excuses, I gathered every shred of evidence. Photographs, audio recordings, text transcripts, an arsenal of facts that no apology could counteract. My determination solidified into a singular objective. I would expose her, ruin her illusions, and ensure that her world crumbled as she had shattered mine. She had lit this fuse. I would deliver the explosion. I became skilled at pretending ignorance. Each morning, we shared a half-hearted breakfast while I feigned sleepy contentment, watching her closely. Her lies sprouted like weeds. She had extra work at the office, was volunteering for weekend shifts, or meeting up with old friends. I learned to nod with interest, my gaze heavy with false trust. At night, I listened to her hushed phone calls, memorized the deceptions whispered under our roof. Meanwhile, Mark continued his surveillance, gathering every morsel of incriminating evidence. My fury was tempered by cold calculation, and I waited, certain there would come a moment when unveiling her betrayal would make her realize exactly how deeply she had wounded me and how merciless I could be in return. One crisp Saturday, she prepared to leave under the guise of a yoga class. I kissed her cheek, inhaling the faint scent of perfume she rarely wore around me anymore. Once she was gone, I followed at a distance. She drove across town and parked near a trendy cafe. Through the large windows, I could see Vincent waiting for her in a corner booth. My hands steadied as I snapped pictures of them sharing an intimate embrace. He slid his hand over hers, and she leaned into him, her smile more radiant than any she'd shown me in months. My heart twisted, but I refused to be undone. This was the proof I needed, the final push toward confrontation. I entered the cafe, masking my turbulent emotions behind a polite smile. At first, neither of them noticed me. I walked right to their table and dropped a folder of photographs. Rachel recoiled as she flipped through them, her face draining of color. Vincent stared at me, his mouth opening in silent shock. The patrons nearby sensed the tension and fell quiet, their gazes darting between us. Rachel tried to speak, perhaps to concoct some desperate lie, but the evidence before her was irrefutable. I leaned in, spoke calmly about the months of phone records and videos, about the nights she'd spent claiming late shifts while entwined with him. The flicker of terror in her eyes was almost satisfying. I didn't stay to listen to her pleas. Instead, I walked out, my footsteps echoing across the tiled floor. The chilly air outside slapped me, but I welcomed it. I knew she'd come rushing home, desperate to salvage whatever she could. My mind roiled with possibilities for what I would do next. Part of me craved a raw, immediate altercation, but I also desired to exact a more thorough revenge, one that would rob her not just of her pride, but of the comfortable life she had exploited. It wasn't enough to confront her in public. I wanted her to feel the full brunt of my wrath in the days to come. When she arrived home, tears already streaked her cheeks. She crumbled at my feet, sobbing apologies and frantically declaring she'd made a horrible mistake. Her mascara ran in dark rivulets, and her trembling fingers clutched my pant legs. For a moment, I stared at her, memories flickering of the woman I once adored. But the weight of her betrayal crushed any lingering affection. I recalled those intimate photos, the smiles she reserved for Vincent, and her manipulative denials. Her voice trembled as she promised she'd cut him off forever, that she would do anything if I gave her another chance. The desperation in her eyes was real, but so was my resolve. I told her she had destroyed every ounce of trust I'd once placed in her. She clung to me, blaming herself, calling me darling and my love, all those terms of endearment she had sullied. I demanded that she get off the floor and face me like an adult, but she continued to weep. Rage unfurled in my chest like a smoldering fire, and I yanked my arm from her grip. I explained there would be no forgiveness, that some lines once crossed could never be redrawn. If she believed crocodile tears would erase months of deceit, then she had grossly underestimated what her lies had birthed in me. Her sobs twisted into pleas. She begged me not to reveal the details to her family or friends, terrified of how they might judge her. That was precisely the terror I wanted her to feel, the dread of having her carefully curated image shattered. I informed her that I'd already secured a lawyer and compiled evidence for a divorce on grounds of adultery. She gasped, clinging to the last scraps of hope. She proposed therapy, a trial separation, anything to spare her from the shame. But I was no longer interested in compromise. My self-respect outweighed the pity her tears might have invoked. She dragged herself to the living room couch and tried to muster an explanation, spinning tales of how she felt neglected or lonely, how Vincent had been a temporary escape. Her excuses rang hollow. Every memory of her meeting him, every text where they mocked my ignorance, flooded my mind. She had thrived on my supposed obliviousness. I reminded her of all the covert phone calls, the stolen money from our joint account, the sweet nothings she'd whispered to someone else while I slept in the next room. She had made her bed of deceit, and now she would lie in it. The next day, I cleared our joint bank account into a new one under my name, informed her that she had lost access to the funds she'd been siphoning for secret rendezvous. She sobbed, insisting she had no plan to leave me. Yet, the bank statements told a different story. Furious, she accused me of punishing her disproportionately, of lacking mercy. I shot back that mercy was not for those who methodically undermine their spouse's trust. If she wanted to talk about disproportionate measures, she should consider how her betrayal had burned a hole through my life. I gave her a week to pack her belongings. In the meantime, she was still under my roof, which allowed me to watch her unravel day by day. Each morning, her eyes were swollen and red, and she hovered near me, seeking any sign of leniency. Each night, I closed my bedroom door firmly, leaving her to the guest room, where I heard her muffled cries long after midnight. I felt a faint pang of guilt once or twice, but the memory of her in another man's arms quickly eradicated it. The moment she chose to betray me, she forfeited the right to my sympathy. Her parents called, distraught at the news of our impending divorce. Apparently, she had broken down on the phone, telling them half-truths about our marital issues. They pleaded with me to reconsider, to attend counseling, but I refused to budge, calmly explaining what their daughter had done. Silence stretched on the other end of the line, followed by subdued apologies. Even they could not defend her actions once they understood the full extent of her disloyalty. The humiliation she dreaded was becoming a reality, and I found a twisted sense of justice in that. I encountered Vincent only once more. He tried to corner me in a parking lot downtown, demanding that I stop dragging his name through the mud. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that startled even me. I warned him that if he valued his reputation, he should pray the evidence of their affair remained contained in divorce proceedings rather than entering the public sphere. His bluster faded instantly, and he slunk away, leaving behind a faint sneer that betrayed his cowardice. I felt no urge to swing a punch. His existence was already tainted by the knowledge of what he had done, and that he'd run when consequences loomed. Within days, my lawyer filed the necessary papers. Rachel tried to stall, urging me to think about our history, the laughter we once shared, the plans we had for a future. Her desperation grated on me. Where was this devotion when she was slipping out to meet Vincent? Where was her commitment during the months she lied to my face? Her pleas were a pathetic afterthought. I told her I wanted a swift legal dissolution, that I would see to it she left with only the bare minimum owed to her. She called me cruel, but my cruelty was nothing compared to the slow knife of her betrayal. The final straw came when she attempted to manipulate me by threatening self-harm if I left her. My stomach recoiled at the audacity. While I acknowledged the seriousness of mental health, I also recognized a desperate tactic. I told her that if she was truly at risk, she should seek professional help. But her words rang insincere, more blackmail than genuine plea. I refused to be caged by her manipulations. If she thought her emotional theatrics would make me revert to pity, she was wrong. I had grown immune to her tears, steeled by the humiliations I'd endured. When the court date arrived, I stood by my lawyer's side, stone-faced, as the judge went through the motions. Rachel sat across the aisle, trembling, clutching tissues in her lap. Her once confident posture had deflated under the weight of scandal and guilt. Our marriage, which had begun with such promise, had been reduced to a legal proceeding dissecting her affair and my subsequent claims for damages. My lawyer presented photos, phone records, and bank statements. The grim evidence of her disloyalty gave the court no room for doubt. She tried to weep her way into sympathy, but the facts were unyielding. The judge granted me a favorable settlement, citing her blatant infidelity. She lost not only my trust, but also a significant financial cushion. As the gavel fell, Rachel's sobs filled the courtroom. She glanced at me with an expression that pleaded for a last shred of empathy. I offered none. I walked out, ignoring the stares of strangers who might have felt pity for the weeping woman behind me. None of them knew the cold treachery she had inflicted upon me, the heartbreak that had gouged my soul until I resolved to reclaim my dignity by any means necessary. In the days after the divorce, I focused on restoring my life. I sold the house that we had once dreamed would be our family home. The echoes of her lies lingered in every corner, and I wanted no reminders of what had transpired within those walls. I moved into a modest apartment and immersed myself in work, grateful for the distraction. Occasionally, I caught myself recalling happier moments, the college days when we were unstoppable, the anniversaries spent wrapped in each other's arms. But each memory only underscored the depth of her betrayal. Nostalgia held no power over me anymore. Word spread among mutual friends, some of whom tried to remain neutral. Their condolences felt empty, and I withdrew from social events to avoid the curious whispers. Rachel, I heard, struggled to find her footing. Vincent had distanced himself to avoid further scandal, leaving her alone with the wreckage she'd created. A twisted sense of satisfaction filled me whenever I imagined her regret. No apology could undo her choices. No regret could erase what she had done. My revenge was to withhold what she truly craved now: forgiveness. One cold, rainy night, she appeared at my new place. Her hair was plastered to her face, and her eyes were wild with desperation. She said she had no one else, that she was truly sorry, that she needed help. I could see the raw terror in her. Once, I might have offered comfort. Now, I calmly told her to seek shelter elsewhere. She begged, claiming she would pay for what she had done if I could only show her a path back. I pointed toward the elevator and shut my door. the echo of her sobbing rattling in the corridor. Though some might say my actions were merciless, I felt an unrepentant sense of justice. The anger that had once consumed me finally began to subside, replaced by a stoic acceptance. I was free from her lies, free to rebuild on my own terms. Whenever I looked in the mirror, I refused to see myself as a victim. I saw someone who demanded respect, and someone who refused to forgive a betrayal so profound it had shattered the very foundation of love. That stance was the backbone of my identity now, a shield against any lingering illusions of reconciliation. In the quiet days that followed, I took inventory of my life. I cut ties with those who sided with her, surrounded myself with people I could trust. I channeled my anger into healthier pursuits, running at dawn, painting abstract canvases that mirrored my inner tumult, volunteering at local shelters. The emptiness she had left in our shared existence was gradually replaced by new passions, small achievements, and personal victories that reawakened the man I once was. Day by day, my thirst for revenge cooled, but I never softened in my resolve that she deserved to bear the weight of her choices. Months later, I heard she had attempted to reach out through a friend, asking if I might meet her for closure. I declined without a second thought. Closure, for me, was not a friendly chat over coffee. Closure had come the moment the divorce was finalized, and I watched her sign those papers that severed our bond. Perhaps she wanted absolution, but I had none to give. If my refusal hardened me, so be it. I had earned the right to protect myself from further pain. Let her come to terms with her own conscience, without my involvement. Sometimes I revisit old photographs from when our smiles were genuine and our eyes bright with shared dreams. A twinge of sadness hits me, but it no longer cuts as deeply as it once did. I accepted that people can betray and break what should be sacred, that promises can be shattered by selfish whims. My lesson learned is that no matter how deeply you love someone, if they violate your trust, you owe them no easy forgiveness. My pride is not prideful arrogance, but self-preservation, an assertion that I will not be reduced by someone else's treachery. In this new life I've carved out, I wake up early to jog through the park, relishing the crisp air. I concentrate on my career, thriving where once I was distracted by heartbreak. I meet friends for dinner, talk about travel plans. I live without the constant dread of deception, liberated from the shackles of her duplicity. And whenever the ghosts of her voice or the memory of her touch rise in my mind, I remind myself of the day I caught her red-handed, her eyes wide with guilt. That memory steels my spine. There was no forgiveness for her betrayal, no gentle pardon for the cruelty she inflicted. Now, if I hear rumors of how she struggles, rejected by the man she risked everything for, estranged from her family, battling her conscience, I feel neither triumph nor pity. I simply feel that balance has been served. The universe, in its own way, has a ledger for transgressions. She chose to cheat and lie, to undermine the bond we once cherished. My response, shaped by heartbreak and tempered by self-respect, was to ensure she confronted the consequences. That is my final word on the matter, the last echo of a chapter I refuse to reopen. By the time I signed the final document relinquishing our last shared asset, I stood tall. I'd come a long way from the broken man who once wept in silence as he watched his wife slip away into the arms of another. The scars remain, but they are a reminder of boundaries I will never allow anyone to cross again. In the end, her pleas for forgiveness were drowned out by the roar of her own dishonesty. She must live with that guilt, and I will live with my dignity intact. Our story ends here, with no forgiveness, only the justice I owed myself.